Hello and welcome back to Clem's Content Corner, the number one place for line of duty content on YouTube. Season 6 has begun, and today we are going to be digging into the first episode, looking at what has happened so far, what might be coming next, and what I thought of the episode in general. First thing I will say is that episode 1 was a bit more of a slow burn than we're used to for an opener with line of duty. There was a lot of time spent familiarising the audience with the guest lead, DCI Davidson, and her investigation, rather than dropping the audience straight into the action. This was maybe necessary this time around, as a lot of time has passed since we last saw the team, the circumstances are very different, and the events in the city have progressed a lot as well. Get used to the word chiz, by the way. It comes up a lot in the first episode, and I had no idea what it meant either. I have since learned it stands for Covert Human Intelligence Source, so it's a police informant, and whilst every new acronym takes a bit of getting used to, again, this is how the police would probably talk to each other, so credit to the BBC for giving the go-ahead to such realistic dialogue, even if it asks the viewer to get on board with the new vernacular. Next of all, Buckles is back, Superintendent Buckles this time, and I'm still thinking he is the real H. The episode dropped a few things that furthered my suspicions, with Buckles being dismissive of DCI Davidson's tip-off coming from a sex worker, even though it turned out to be genuine. The informant was then swiftly killed off before they could confirm whether the suspect they had brought in was the right person. It was also brought to my attention by one of my viewers, and on rewatching I can confirm, that Ian Buckles had a bag of golf clubs behind his chair in his office. It was only on screen briefly, and at first I didn't even notice, but with the information about H coming from Dot, and Dot's nickname being the Caddy, it could be one more subtle clue as to the identity of the top man, and would otherwise be an odd thing to keep around the police station. Next on the agenda, Kate has moved on from AC-12, and now happens to be on DCI Davidson's team, investigating the murder of Gail Vella. She's made a fresh start, working hard to win over the trust of her new colleagues, known as having previously worked in anti-corruption, and it all appears to be on the level, using her real surname rather than an undercover moniker. But a spanner has been thrown in the works by suspicions about Davidson being brought to the attention of AC-12 by Farida Jatri. Steve has given Kate a heads up, knowing how hostile things could get towards an ex-anti-corruption officer if the team starts to investigate, and ironically, Kate now needs to turn informant to keep AC-12's investigation covert, or else they will have to investigate more visibly, and Kate's new colleagues will suspect her of being undercover against them, even if she isn't. So that's an intriguing damned if you do, damned if you don't angle to work for the character. Kate's home life also seems to be suffering again, apparently separated once more, and not getting to see her son as often as she would like. Onto Steve himself, we see DSR not being quite cold towards the new DC, Chloe Bishop, despite her being very helpful and proactive, and with Steve conceding to Ted that she is doing a good job. Ted is featured very little in the first episode, with Deputy Chief Constable Wise excluding Ted from police meetings and advising him to keep his head down. Back to Steve's unsympathetic vibe around Chloe, I suspect this may be the beginning of Steve recognising that he has feelings for Kate, and resenting having to adjust to her being replaced on the team. I'm a bit on the fence as to whether Steve and Kate becoming romantically involved would be a good thing for the story. It all depends on how it's executed, but not every male and female lead need to be destined to fall for each other. There are plenty of fish in the sea, and even a main character staying single is a perfectly reasonable thing to have happen. I do see Steve as being reserved around Chloe and still close to Kate as a good catalyst for drama though, and in my Season 6 preview said that I think Chloe will be suspected of misleading AC-12 later in the series, when in fact it could really be Kate, possibly with her family threatened by the OCG. In addition to being icy with DZ Bishop, we also see Steve meet with his ex from Season 2, Nicola Rogerson, discusses a potential move away from AC-12 and resists her advances, citing how they're going to be working together in the future as the reason. Steve also seems to be addicted to painkillers, still recovering from his back injury from Seasons 4 and 5, and I wonder if these plot threads could be tied together to make the pill addiction more interesting. Perhaps when Steve couldn't perform when reuniting with Sam Railston in the previous season, it wasn't due to his injury, but rather that it was Kate he truly had feelings for and felt that hooking up with Sam again would have been wrong. Regarding AC-12's investigation of Davidson, the ball of course started rolling with Farida coming to AC-12, similar to how Tim Ifield approached Steve with concerns in Season 4, and in general the show seems to be returning to some themes from that season. Farida was on Roz Huntley's team, whose investigation was mentioned by Steve when talking to Hastings, and the interview of Terry Boyle felt reminiscent of how Michael Farmer was mistreated in Operation Trapdoor. From the framing of Michael in the 4th season, we know that the OCG set up easily confused and suggestible people as soft targets, knowing they are compliant and agreeable enough that they won't put up much resistance when accused. However, unlike Tim Ifield, Farida seems to be backpedaling on her initial request for an AC-12 investigation, asking Steve to end all contact with her, with Farida seemingly afraid of DCI Davidson. It later transpires that the two are in a failing relationship, with Davidson collecting the last of her things from what had been their shared apartment, only to be met by accusations from Farida of being unfaithful, then discovering that Farida has sliced up her jacket out of spite, and closing with Farida begging for Joanne to stay. All of this really has the viewer questioning how reliable anything coming from the unstable Farida can be, which is an interesting way to offset the strange and suspicious behaviour coming from DCI Davidson earlier in the episode, which we will get into now. So on their way to bring in a suspect in the murder of the journalist Gail Vella, DCI Davidson spots what she thinks is an armed robbery, rerouting her convoy to intervene. This would be fair enough, as an immediate threat to the public always comes first, but all Joanne had to base this change of plan on was a van parked outside a betting shop as she drove past at high speed, and yet withal, she turned out to be right. On looking into the perpetrators, their criminal history was minimal, and this would have been by far the biggest crime any of them had ever committed. So it appears as though this armed robbery could have been set up to give DCI Davidson an excuse to delay their mission, which would have given the OCG the time to make the preparations to frame Terry Boyle, all of which would imply that DCI Davidson was working with the OCG. At some point, Operation Lighthouse, tasked with solving the murder of Gail Vella, changed SIO to put Joanne Davidson in charge, and if my theories about Buckles are correct, then when an SIO is replaced in a case pertaining to OCG activity, the OCG tend to pull strings to have Ben Copper lead the investigation, with Hilton taking over the Greek Lane murders case, and Buckles himself replacing Tony Gates in the search for Jackie Laverty, as well as taking over Operation Trapdoor from Ross Huntley. Has Davidson been brought in as SIO for the purpose of derailing the entire inquiry? I will give my thoughts at the end of the video. While we're on the subject, there was a 3-hour window where the suspect's apartment was unmonitored because of a mistake in the paperwork. Who was responsible for the oversight? The team's superintendent, Ian Buckles. On to the suspect themselves. If it wasn't Terry Boyle that the Chiz was talking about, then who was it? Well, a second set of fingerprints were matched to Carl Banks, already on the system for a string of violent offences and links to organised crime. Carl isn't a character we've encountered just yet, but the surname could suggest a relation to Lee Banks, an OCG gunman from Season 5. Signs of forced entry at Beechwood House look shady, and the thorough cleaning job done at Boyle's own apartment juxtaposed against the prominently displayed photographs of the murder victim, all on top of what we already know about how the OCG have previously exploited Terry, it definitely looks like a setup, and one that DCI Davidson could have had some involvement in. Just a few final things I want to include before I sign off. DCI Davidson claimed to have no family when walking out on Farida, but later became angry when back in her own home, whilst looking at a framed photograph which I'm going to guess was one of a young Joanne and her mother. Joanne also has very extensive security to her home, with a lot of extra locks in the front door, suggesting maybe some paranoia of her own, despite lambasting Farida earlier for her persecution complex, and there were some passing hints that Davidson is attracted to Kate, though no evidence of the affair that Farida insisted was happening behind her back. I think Kate will end up going undercover, pretending to reciprocate Davidson's feelings and establish a fake romance to get the right information. However, not just undercover for AC-12, but actually undercover for the OCG, in a move that could push her relationship with Steve to breaking point. Whilst I do think Joanne is leading the investigation away from the OCG, I don't think it's as an inside job. With the return of some themes from Season 4, I think just as the OCG set up a scenario for Roz, knowing how she would respond and go after Michael Farmer, I think the OCG set up that armed robbery for Joanne to find, rather than with her help, and her near telepathic ability to spot it on the way past is just a part of her enigmatic character. That might sound implausible, but then Jed said it would be. As for Kelly Macdonald's performance thus far, I'm a little torn on the first episode. Her delivery was a little strange at times, although playing a character who is supposed to be odd, this might just be a feature of the character, and I did think Joanne's condescending, faux sympathetic tone when interviewing Terry worked well to get the audience feeling particularly sorry for a character with Down syndrome being set up to take the fall for a murder he never would have committed. So overall, I felt the episode was a solid start. Even though it was quite complicated and took me a second watch to properly digest, it did plant a lot of things for later which I'm sure will be fleshed out and expanded upon as the story unfolds. But as a standalone episode, I actually thought it was a bit tame and lacked the frantic pace we've come to associate with Line of Duty over the last 9 years. This slightly slower build might be the reason they've opted to go for 7 episodes rather than the usual 6 this time around, but we will see where it goes, and I'm certainly still looking forward to seeing what's in store for the rest of the season. Anyhow, that's a wrap. Comment your thoughts on the episode below, don't forget to like and subscribe, ring that notification bell if you want to join my best team, and most importantly, have a great day.